Is Naomi Simpson. Sorry. There we go. Now we'll go. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Naomi Simpson. I teach communication classes here at LFCC. When I first started working at LFCC, I worked in the admissions and records office and in financial aid, and I did a lot of different things with our student services staff. And now that I've been teaching full-time, 7 years, 8 years, I think, somewhere in there. I'm really excited about all of that, but I've been asked to hold a session for you all in the summer series and a couple of other things. And so tonight we're going to talk about some strategies for effective communication. And this is kind of like a teaser or a preview, if you will, of some of the things that we would cover in early in an interpersonal communication class or in our intro to communication class, or even some of the things that we would talk about early in our public speaking classes. So I hope that you find something from this session that you like or that resonates with you, and then take the opportunity at the end of the slideshow to use your phone to grab the QR code and fill out a little short survey to let me know what I did well or what we can work on, and then also take a look at the information for the entries for the session that Sarah will tell us about in a little while. So again, this session is strategies for effective communication, and some of the things that we're going to, a little bit about me. Told you that you can reach me by email nsimpson@lfcc.edu, or you can call my office phone number, and I have that forwarded to my phone. Or if you'd like, you can send a text message to my Google Voice number, which is there on the screen. So some of the topics we'll explore in our session today, what the communication process is, what it looks like.
Could you go back to the last slide for one
second?
second?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I needed to pause a little bit longer.
Thank you.
So feel free to reach out anytime if you do have a question about a CST class, or if you're interested in the communication field, what offerings are available as far as that goes, some of the transfer agreements that we have or that we're working on with some of the four-year schools in the state of Virginia, as well as our forensics program or our competitive speech, drama, and debate. So if that's something that you're interested in, I help coordinate that along with our chat host, Sarah Pengel. So some of the topics that we are covering tonight, topics that we'll explore, include things about the communication process, what that is, if we were to draw it out on a piece of paper, what that would look like, some barriers to effective communication, identifying places within that communication process where communication tends to break down. And I always tell my students that talking and listening have to go hand in hand with each other. So we'll think about some effective listening habits that we can work on improving, as well as some verbal and nonverbal communication tips to help you be a better communicator overall. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to pop something in the chat and Sarah can let me know, or just ask me to stop and we'll keep going. Okay. So the first thing that we'll talk about is the communication process, or what communication is. And in order to get to the spot where we can say, this is what communication looks like, we have to have a good base level definition for it. And so what the communication researchers will tell you, what seasoned faculty members would tell you, is that communication is how we convey information through our thoughts, through the messages that we have, through information. And we convey those ideas, that information, those thoughts and messages through speech, through our visuals, through signals, like hand gestures and that kind of thing, writing, and even behavior. So if you want to get more specific, communication is that meaningful exchange of information between two or more people. And the other thing that I tell my students all the time is that we communicate because there is some type of relationship there. Whatever that relationship is, whether it's a child to a parent to another parent, there's some type of relationship that's there. So thinking about communication, we think generally in terms of how you communicate with another person, but it could be how you communicate with another person and more than just that. So the way that we describe, or the way that we can illustrate what happens in the communication process, relies on some basic models of communication. And when we think about basic models of communication, we think about what is the core element of communication. And so at its core, communication is that personal process. It involves a change in behavior. We use communication to influence other people. There's a lot of that going on right now. It can motivate people to take action or to not take action. It expresses our thoughts and our emotions through words and actions. And it is a very social and emotional process. So as we'll find a little bit later on, that sometimes when the communication process starts to break down, there's a tension that's there between how we see ourselves and how we see whatever the issue is socially, and then the emotional impacts it has, and how good we are at communicating the emotional impact. So when we think about communication and we think about our messages and we think about how much of our message our students are retaining, or how much of our message other people are retaining, we remember on average about 20% of what we hear. Okay. That's not a lot. It's very little. Okay. We remember on average about 30% of what we see. But when we add the two together and we can see and hear things at the same time, that starts to move towards a higher level of retention, of information retention, at about 70%. So when we can see something and when we can hear something and we can do that at the same time, we tend to retain more of the information. So when we can see our friend on a FaceTime call, or when we can see our friend in person, we feel like there's a stronger connection there. We can remember more of what's going on. But if you take just a message that you hear alone, you might not remember as much as you would as if you saw that message in writing. But the two of them together work wonders in helping us retain and remember information. So what does that information look like? How do we keep that information and how do we get through it? Well, the information, the communication is comprised of the four basic elements: the spoken word, the visual images, the body language, and the written word. So all four of these elements, it's kind of like a cyclical relationship. You take one part out of it and it's not going to be as effective as it could be as if you put the element back in. But each one of these elements of communication can function independently. So the way that we communicate, when we think about how we can be better communicators and how we communicate, we think about things like the words that we use, or the tone of voice, the body language, our sentence structure, and then the style and rhythm of our speech. And so different things help us to remember information, remember content. But when we focus on creating messages that use stronger words, stronger descriptors, things that like alliteration and assonance and repetition and things that you learn about in your English and literature classes. And we think about the performance elements like the tone of voice and the body language. Those things kind of all start to work together to help us become better communicators. So, like I said a few minutes ago, communication is that process of sending and receiving messages and information among people. Okay. When we think and break it down, and if we were to draw it, it may look something like this. So you have a sender who is sending a message, and part of that sender's job is to take what they're thinking, take the images that they're thinking in their mind, translate them into words, or translate them into a graphic, or translate that into an email message, and then send that information through whichever medium they decide to the receiver. And then the receiver is processing that message or decoding that message, and then taking that information and letting it go the way it needs to go in their brain. So this is descriptive of one of the early models of communication, and it didn't account for everything that was happening. And they later added a feedback element to the communication model. And so what that feedback element says is that the receiver sends the feedback back to the sender, and that process kind of starts all over again. So when we have problems with the process, problems with the communication process, we get into areas where noise kind of blocks the message from going to one place or the other. So when it's done correctly, or when it happens correctly, we know our communication is effective when it produces the intended or desired results. Maybe you're giving a persuasive speech and you want everybody to register to vote, and you have a voter registration sheet, or you have a website pulled up on a tablet, you pass that around, and at the end of the day you have 10 people that registered to vote after listening to your persuasive speech. So that would be a sign that that message has been effective. Okay. Another way that we can determine whether or not our message is effective is whether or how we start to understand someone else or a particular situation a little bit better than we had understood it before. Or we use communication to help us solve problems or account for differences by building trust and earning respect with each other. Or we use communication effectively when we feel like we have strong decision-making skills. So how do we get to effective communication? And my little tip for you is going to be to think through the 6 C's of communication, or the 6 C's of effective communication. Okay. They're all here on the screen, but then we'll take a look at groups of 3 of them at a time. So courtesy, completeness, correctness, conciseness, clarity, and consideration. So courtesy is the first one. I don't have them in any particular order, but they kind of go hand in hand with each other, and they're kind of repetitive, and that's just the nature of it. But courtesy is that notion of being polite and respectful and expecting politeness and respect in return. Completeness is that the message that we're sending includes everything necessary to convey that meaning that we intend, so that you're not unintentionally leaving anything out. Sometimes we send an incomplete message. I've done it several times where I've sent a message to someone, an email, and I forget to attach a document that I said, please see the attached document, that message is incomplete at that time. And so you've got to focus on trying to make sure you are being as complete as possible with your messages. The next element is correctness. And this is where you're paying attention to small details and accounting for or dealing with errors in like usage and language, and making sure that you are precise and you're not really mincing your words, but you're not like leaving too much open to interpretation either. So you've got a limited kind of way that that message could be interpreted. Okay, so that's the first three. And then the fourth one is conciseness. So you're being straight and to the point. You're not repeating yourself 4 or 5 times in a paragraph, that you've got the message, it's clear, it's one thing, or it's multiple things and it's straight and to the point, but you're doing that in concise language, using the least amount of words. And then the fifth one is clarity. And so the clarity helps to understand the message. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the conciseness and the language choice, so that you're using the words that mean what you want them to mean and being intentional with that word choice. And then the sixth one is consideration. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the courtesy at the very beginning, in that you are ensuring your self-respect of the audience, and that you're doing the least that you can do to harm the emotions of the audience. So think about it in terms of that persuasive speech again. For example, our classes, our CST 110 and our CST 100 class, as they're designed right now, require students to give a persuasive speech as part of the class. So if you're being considerate of the audience, you're going to shy away from topics that are highly controversial or topics that are very emotional for your audience members, and provide that element of self-respect there. So again, we have the 6 C's. And to review one more time, I should have had them on another slide. To review one more time, they are the conciseness, clarity, consideration, courtesy, completeness, and correctness. And it doesn't matter which order you put them in, there's just 6 of them. And they all start, for the most part, with CO. How weird is that? Anyway, so we'll go back to this one and click on through. So if we take a look at that communication model again, where you have the sender sending a message to the receiver processing the message, sending the feedback back to the sender, we think about where there could be errors in how we interpret the message, or we think about where there could be barriers in that message development. And more times than not, they're either going to be a problem with that interference from the signal sent from the sender to the receiver, or how the receiver sends the feedback back to the sender. So the 2 places that we see the errors in communication, or the communication barriers, are usually between the sender and something dealing with the message and how it's being sent, or from the receiver and how the receiver is conveying feedback back to the sender. So anything that interferes with how that signal is sent to the receiver, or the receiver sending the message back to the sender, is that barrier to communication. So the list that's here on the screen represents several different ones. There's 7 that are here that are considered common communication barriers. Okay. You have noise, the inappropriate medium, having assumptions or misconceptions about whatever the topic is, emotions, language differences, poor listening skills, and distractions are all common communication barriers. Okay. So at this point, we're going to pause in some of the things that I've told you about, let you digest it for a little bit. But I want to hear from you in terms of what are some of the things that have been communication barriers for you, or what are some of the results of communication barriers that you've experienced?
Well, we can do this over mic, right?
Yeah, of course.
Personally, usually this often happens at work or during a fast-paced situation where I'm not really in the position to give like direct orders, and I'm trying to reach a common ground with a fellow employee, and I'll stutter over my words trying to sound courteous while still sounding like confident in my decisions. And as I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to say, people get bored or another task shows up and I'm not able to do it fast enough.
Sure. So that combines a few of these different barriers. Maybe the inappropriate medium because somebody's asking you for a decision and that decision-making capacity is not necessarily yours to begin with. That they have poor listening skills, that they're not really listening to you, or they're breaking up parts of the message trying to get what it is that they want. But then the emotions that are there too. Yeah. Thanks for the example. What are some others?
I've noticed uh I've noticed a lot of times when I'm talking to someone and I'm trying to make a point clear and I'm ready to hear what they have to say, but instead like it's more defensiveness rather than like asserting their position. I
Sure.
guess I guess in those situations you can ask like what they think, right? Like what do you think on this?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where the effective listening comes into play. And that's kind of where we're headed. But that's definitely one of the things. They might just be wanting to express whatever's bothering them just for the sake of expressing it and not necessarily seeking a response. Or they might be trying to gauge how you respond to certain things. But those are definitely things where there's a misconception or assumption about what they want you to do. You have this assumption about what you should do with what they're telling you, but there might not be alignment there with what they want you to do with what you're telling them. Got anything in the chat, Sarah?
Nothing yet. You all can put stuff in the chat if you don't feel comfortable or you don't have the ability to talk on the mic. You can just type something real quick into the chat.
Okay. So these communication barriers happen all the time. And sometimes we just don't pay much attention to them. And other times they can be like a freight train stopping moment in an organization. And I think some of the things that would, in my personal experience, that would clear a lot of things up is to make sure that we're on par and on top of how we listen and demonstrating our listening skills and listening more effectively. And the reason that I say that is that there are surveys that are done every year for top CEOs of companies asking about what kind of skills do you want people that your company hires to have when they start working for you. And year after year, several of the skills, and I don't have a separate slide and I just thought of it to include it, but maybe next time I'll put it in there. But year after year, there's like 7 or 8 basic communication skills that are on that list. And those 7 or 8 communication skills all kind of get back to the root of listening and how we communicate and how we process and send messages. And it's not so much having the physical skills of being able to do a job. Maybe it's not like, maybe it's not necessarily trade type skills or skills for software or skills for technology, even though those are probably part of them, but they're more of what we consider soft skills, which communication just falls right into that grouping. But year after year, between listening and other communication skills like nonverbal communication, eye contact, writing clear messages, speaking clearly, being confident in how you speak, those are things that show up on that list of desired traits for new hires within organizations. So the direction that we're going now is focusing on what are really good listening skills and how we can develop them. So listening is how we absorb the meaning of words and sentences and how our brain processes the information. And it leads to how we understand things like facts and ideas, but paired with how we talk and how we share information, we use communication to share from one generation to the next ideas or expectations. We use communication and listening to help assimilate to our organizational cultures and help become part of different cultures and different elements happening within some of the organizations we participate in. So when we think about the listening process and we think about how we define listening and what listening is, we are left with several stages of listening. And so really quickly, I want to touch on the differences between listening and hearing. And the key difference between the two is that we can passively hear things, but when we actively start to process and pay attention to what's going on, communication scholars call that giving it salience, we transition from hearing to listening. And so the 6 stages of the listening process, I think I've only got 5 here, oh my goodness, are hearing, focusing on the message and not the person, comprehending and interpreting, responding, and remembering. Okay, so summarized into 5 steps of the process of listening, we have hearing and paying enough attention to the message and not the person, comprehending and interpreting, figuring out what has been said and then what we need to do with it, and then responding if there's a response required, and then finally remembering the message. So let's try out a listening exercise. I've got the content out on the screen, but I'm going to read it out loud, which I know is filling up our processing centers. And then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions in just a second to try out our listening exercise. So Pat Bolton, the managing director of Riddle Publishing, received a telephone call from the Nottingham district manager, Peter McDonald. During the call, Bolton mentioned the possibility of McDonald relocating to the East Midlands regional office, which is currently a warehouse scheduled for conversion. McDonald explained that a recent college graduate in architectural design by the name of Madood could design the conversion. Bolton agreed that Madood should be interviewed. Okay. What's going on in that message?
Madood was preferable.
So yeah, Madood was preferable. You should be interviewed for the job. So it's hard, right? It's hard processing a message when you see something visually and you're hearing it, but then there's so much stuff that's there in that message that you're having a hard time focusing on, Bolton, managing director, Nottingham district, McDonald, Madood, Midlands, like you're trying to figure out what's going on. So that's why it's really important that we focus on, when we're thinking about how we're generating messages and when we think about how we communicate with others, we've kind of got to think 2 steps ahead and design our messages for the audience that they're intended for. So we've got to design the message for the person that is listening to it or the person that is seeing it. Okay, it might have been easier for Pat Bolton to pick up the telephone and say, hey, we've got a candidate. His last name is Madood. He's a recent college graduate in architectural design, and he's going to help us convert this warehouse in the Midlands office, for the Midlands office. That would be so much easier than everything that's here in this particular example. So this is just, sometimes there's a lot of extraneous information in the messages that we're presented with. And some people want to make it complicated just for the sake of making it complicated to see if you're really following them. But if you take and you start thinking about it and you go through the listening process, you go through the 5 steps in that listening process and you start to break it down, then you might realize that it might not be as complicated as it had been. Okay. So yes, information, processing information, listening, especially in a college classroom, and especially as a new student in a college classroom or a newer student in a college classroom, or inexperienced student, I don't know how you want to call it, but without necessarily the confidence and the use of these communication and listening skills continually, it's easy to make it harder on yourself than what it really is. So if we think through the listening process and we think through how we are dealing with messages, then it makes it so much easier for us in the long run. So how do we do that? We break it down into levels. And the first level is of internal listening. And in the internal listening level, we are focusing on yourself and your own thoughts. Okay. And we've got to move from level 1 to level 2 so that we're focusing on the speaker and interpreting that information carefully. Okay. You've got to get to a spot where you're okay with listening, that you can put your undivided attention to whatever's going on. And then you start to focus that listening on the speaker and interpreting what that speaker is saying carefully. Okay. From there, we move, once we move from level 1 to level 2, we start thinking about ways that we can listen better, or we start thinking about ways that we can improve our own listening process. Okay. So when you're listening to someone, when you think about how you listen, you want to think about the things that you're hearing, whether or not you're paying attention to the words, whether you're listening for anything else. And then when you're not listening, to whom are you listening? Are you listening to what's going on in the background? Are you paying attention to the nonverbal cues? Or are you focusing physically on what's being said? So you've got to reinforce, you've got to reflect, and you've got to refocus how you're listening to improve that listening process. And that will help you move from that level 1 listening where you're internalizing a lot of things to that level 2 listening where you're starting to pull bits and pieces together and focusing on the speaker and what the speaker is saying. So do you have an example of a time where your listening wasn't as good as it could have been? Or do you have an example of a time where you thought that you were a really good listener?
Sometimes, like at work, if my boss is being like very like abrasive or in my opinion like unreasonable, then while she's giving orders, it's a lot more difficult to listen to what I actually have to do, because the things that have already happened are kind of distracting me.
Yeah, definitely. So right away, something happens. The emotion of whatever it is, maybe you're irritated. You've been called into a boss's meeting. You got 30 minutes to the end of the day, and you're trying to finish out your thing so you can leave, right? And then all of a sudden, you've got this meeting to go to. So you're a little distracted already, and it's not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but it happens. And so the thing that helps us move from one to the next is recognizing that, oh, I don't listen so well when I'm called into a meeting like this at the end of my shift. Okay, I've got to, if I want to improve what's happening for myself, then I've got to refocus how I'm listening and pay attention to how I'm listening and work to improve that and be conscious of that listening effort in that when that happens. And so then you're not going to be distracted by what else is going on. You are able to listen and pay attention more to what's happening with body language, and maybe you start to notice more things. So one of the things that I did when I first started teaching, I was only able to get away with this once. And that's because it was the first day of the semester and the college had a delayed opening, and it was in the spring. And for whatever reason, we were able to wear jeans that day. And I wore jeans and a sweatshirt to class. And I go in the classroom and I sit down in the middle of the class, and I'm sitting there, and the students start to come into the classroom. And all of a sudden, it's like 5 minutes to the time the class starts. I get up and I walk out of the room, and then I get some water, and then I come back to the room, and I'm sitting down and go back to my seat. And it was kind of funny. I come back in, and somebody was just starting to sit there, and she's like, no, somebody else was sitting there. So anyway, I'm like, no, it's okay. It's totally okay. Take that seat. That's fine. And then I go to the front of the room, and like the look on everybody's face is like, what happened? Who is she and what is she doing? And you really don't pay attention necessarily to what you're doing or what you're saying until you can take a step out of your normal practice, your normal everyday kind of actions, and try to relate to someone else or see something from another perspective. And so when you can do that, when you can reframe and move from these levels on the previous slide, come on. When you can move from that internal focus to more of that external focus, then it helps you really see that you're listening. You're being more conscious about the listening that's going on.
Okay.
So how can you move from that level 1 to that level 2? And how do you know if you're moving to that level 2? And there's a few things that kind of set that up for you. The first is that you start focusing on what the person is saying, and you are listening to what is being said. But you're also catching what they're not saying. Okay. So for example, I'm not sure which school district you all are in. And I think right now, even one of the school systems, I think Warren County School Board meeting is going on. But last night, the Frederick County School Board meeting was about how their reopening plan for Frederick County schools here in Virginia. And it was really interesting to think about the things that were not being said. And so you've got to move from that internal focus to that external focus and focus on the other person, what they're saying, what they're not saying, trying to figure out what they're trying to say, and getting yourself into that person's point of view. And by doing all of this, we start to see kind of a pattern. And that pattern is that you are starting to be a more reflective or a more active listener. Okay. So reflective and active listening. You're moving from being passive, from just hearing it, to doing something with the information that you hear. And so we start to move that direction when we can demonstrate our effective listening through a technique called paraphrasing. Now, you've probably heard of paraphrasing before, and in most cases, it's about how you paraphrase different pieces of text to kind of convey the meaning that's there. But basically, paraphrasing is that restatement of text or a passage that gives meaning in another form. And we do that paraphrasing for clarity or to reword it so that we can say that we've interpreted it and we understand what is being heard in that person's message. So we paraphrase things in writing, and we can paraphrase things that people say as part of that listening process. And the key element to that is that it's what we are reading or what we're hearing that we focus on. So an example to lead into paraphrasing, maybe you're not quite understanding something, or you're wanting someone to convey to you that, or you're wanting to convey to someone else that you're understanding what they're saying. You could say something like, I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but what I'm gathering is, and then fill in the blank. And so you're setting it up so you're asking the person to clarify what they are saying, but you're also providing a summary that shows that you were listening to them. So if you think about it in terms of how we can do it effectively, if we think about it like a formula, if you will, you have the message and the meaning behind that message, plus the emotion. So if you can paraphrase something, the things that you want to pick up and that you want to convey in that paraphrase to demonstrate your effective listening, you want to tell us about the message and what it means and add the emotion in there. So maybe, for example, you and your friend are trying to figure out where they want to go to eat, and nobody can make up their mind. And then all of a sudden, everyone gets upset, and you've got to deal with the conflict. And part of dealing with that conflict is working on those listening skills. And so maybe you're saying, what I'm getting is that you're hungry and that you are upset because you're hungry and you haven't had anything to eat. But where is it that you want to go? So you're adding an element of clarity to there by asking more about that message and the meaning or the emotion. So if we think about how we can paraphrase, and if we think about how we can become more effective listeners, we engage in active listening by using paraphrase to demonstrate those effective listening skills. Okay, so now I have another activity, and this activity I want you to, I don't know if we can do it. We'll try it. I will put you in a short breakout room for a couple of minutes, and I want you to talk with each other. I'll pair you up in groups of two, and I want to, and I'll put Sarah in one room and I'll go into the other. But I want you to, and you don't have to unmute yourselves, or I want you to tell us a story about something that you did within the last week. Okay. And it just, anything at all, doesn't have to be school related, doesn't have to be class related, just something that you did within the last week. And I want you to practice the effective paraphrasing. So what is it that they're saying and the meaning behind it and what emotion they're trying to convey. Okay. So I'm going to get the breakout room set up. So more.
Wait, so just to clarify, we just give like a brief summary of something that happened recently, and then we just say like, we try to convey like how that person felt And
Yeah. So a brief summary of like what they did. So the message and meaning, and then your interpretation of the emotion that's associated with it as a practice paraphrasing thing.
Okay.
So more, I'm gonna participants. Here we go. I'm gonna stop the sharing to see if I can get this. Sarah, can we do breakout rooms?
I did have the option when it was sharing screen. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Create breakout rooms. I'll put Elizabeth and me in that first one, and then the other one, you guys, and then did that work?
Yeah, and we'll do this for like 2 or 3 minutes so that each person has a chance to go, and then we'll come back to the big group.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so it did work. I know, I got hungry too.
Should we start typing?
You can type or you can unmute and talk to each other. It's just the three of us in here. So Elizabeth, if you have a mic or if you can just type in the box, however you'd like to do it is fine.
Okay. I'll type.
Antonio, you modeled exactly kind of what she was asking by saying, so what we're doing is, and then you paraphrased it. So you kind of did exactly what she was asking you to do in this room, where somebody tells you something, and then you paraphrase it back to them so that you're checking your understanding. You did exactly that.
Well, yeah, thanks. I noticed that too as I was doing it. I was like, oh, nice.
Elizabeth, are you there? I don't know if she's able to. Okay, she said hi in the chat. So if one of you wants to go ahead and type a story in, or Antonia, you can tell her your story and then she can type back her response to you, because I'm pretty sure she can hear us.
Is that a good length?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
it's pretty clear. Hmm. Okay, and she responded to you.
Do I like continue, like ask a question?
I think you can. I think you can ask, like if there's something that you're not getting from her, like you ask for clarity and that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Naomi says she's ready to go back to the main room. So we can, guess, return to. I've never used that before, so that was pretty cool.
Okay, how did the breakout session go? Pretty good?
Yeah, Antonio's giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, cool. I saw that. Okay, so I do have, I'll go ahead and reshare my screen again and get back to where we were. And the activity we just completed was an activity for, why is it paused? Stop share. Where's my, no, my slideshow disappeared. Try this again. Okay, so the activity we just completed was a breakout activity where we practice effective paraphrasing, which is one way to demonstrate our effective listening skills. So you might not have engaged in that very much before, but now that you've had an opportunity to do it, I hope that you will find ways to continue to incorporate paraphrasing to other people when you're having conversations, to help them see that, hey, I'm really listening to you. I'm paying attention to what's going on. I want to be in the middle of that conversation and be there. So paraphrasing is one way that we can demonstrate our effective listening skills, and probably the most valuable of them all, I would say. So we did the paraphrase. We already did that. So that brings us to the end of our session, and the last little bit of time that we have today, I wanted to open it up to a Q&A for you, so that if you do have questions, you can get those answered, or if you want to walk through a scenario, you have the opportunity to do that. But we don't necessarily have to include that in the recording. But I have created a little Google form evaluation, and it's just 3 questions that asks you, what did you like about this particular presentation? What are other topics you would be interested in? And then what is other feedback that you have? And then once you complete the little evaluation form, it will give you the URL to these slides so that you can have a copy of them on your own. Excuse me. And then Sarah's going to show the slide for the drawing to be entered, what you need to do for that as well. But we'll open it up for discussion. Anything that you have, anything that you want to share, anything that feedback on as it relates to communication skills.
Okay, and here is the, let me.
I'll stop sharing so you can handle that.
So let me share my screen. And do you all see it? What do you see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, and I'm going to put in the chat, I'm going to put the link there as well. But if you go to this tiny URL that we've created and you fill out the form, it will give you an entry to win an iPad mini, AirPods, or a Nintendo Switch. And it's the legit Switch. It's the one that you can docking station and all that. So we will be announcing the winners on Monday, August 24th, which is the first day of classes. And new students have the option to have up to 5 entries. There's more information on that page. And returning students can have up to 3 entries.
Where's the link?
Is it on the shared screen? Do you see the shared screen? It's also in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yep. If you want to just click on it in the chat, you can do that as well.
Okay.
Yep. And we have more of these this summer. I don't think I'm moderating anything until, I think the next one I'm moderating is English for non-native speakers. And I'm also leading a session on the impact of getting involved in student life, because that's what I do when I'm not teaching part-time public speaking. So you can come see me again for that, and I'll tell you all the great things about getting involved and about all of our opportunities. And then you can go back and watch episodes, sort of like our different sessions, and you'll get to submit entries for watching those in your own time too. All right.
So
All right.
Really
Well,
quickly,
thank
how do you
Oh,
get back to the episodes to watch them?
So Amber Foltz, the Dean of Students, is sending an email, I think once a week or once every 2 weeks. And there is a link to that virtual folder that they send new students. And within there, it's going to have the link to the summer series. And if you scroll down, you'll be able to see the recorded sessions that we've done.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So we're Zoom famous, Naomi.
Awesome.
All right. If you all don't have any questions, you're free to go. It was nice to see you all and glad
all right.
you all
Thank you so
Great
much.
to meet you. And I hope to see you in classes on campus.
Oh
Some
yeah,
point in time or online, however we deal with them.
maybe someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I saw your message in the chat pop up.
These screens start bouncing around and I'm trying to figure out. I'm gonna stop the share.